So here's a fun fact. The protagonist of a series isn't always the good person. Most people assume those two things are the same, the protagonist always being the hero, but this isn't always the case. Sometimes it's an anti-hero, and yes, like with these examples I'll be talking about in this video, sometimes the protagonist is just a straight up arsehole. The protagonist just drives the plot, and it's important to remember that a character can be incredibly well written and performed, and you may love them as a character, but their morals and choices aren't things to aspire to, and it's okay to love a character as they are, without relating to them. Protagonists such as Walter White from Breaking Bad, Eren Yeager from Attack on Titan, pretty much any of the characters from The Boys, and so many other characters fall into this category, but I'll be talking about three in particular in this video. And while he does absolutely count in this discussion, so I am going to mention him here, but I won't be really discussing him at length. Evan Peters' portrayal as Jeffrey Dahmer in Netflix's Dahmer also counts. However, the line between praising a fictional portrayal of a real-life serial killer and bad person, it's not really a line I'm qualified to speak on, so I'm only mentioning him here because as far as the fictionalized version of Dahmer goes, he does count for this video, but I'm not going to talk about any more because there's obviously very real-world repercussions that stem from that portrayal, so I'm not really qualified to talk on that, so I'm not really going to discuss Dahmer from Netflix's Dahmer, so that won't be discussed in this video. In the case of Walter White, many a Twitter posts have sung his praises, declaring Skyler the real villain of the show because woman mad about her family, including her infant daughter and disabled son, being put in danger, something. But Walt is objectively a bad person. Even from the start of the show, there's this narrative that people throw around that Walt was pushed into doing what he does to provide for his family, and is thrown into the world of cooking crystal meth and murdering people. And while that's kind of true to an extent, he shouldn't have had to worry about his medical bills in the first place, he was never really pushed into it. He had offers for help there right from the very start. Elliot Schwartz offers Walt a job at Grey Matters Industries, a well-paid job at that, and Walt sees this as a threat to his manhood and his hypersensitive masculinity, so he ends up turning it down. He sees the job as kind of a handout, and then even turns down Elliot's offer to flat out just pay for his medical bills. Walt was never forced into cooking crystal meth. This wasn't about paying his medical bills, as much as it was about him doing something with his life, building something and being the best at it, and making others submit to him, the way that he feels Elliot and Gretchen made him submit to them. There's something ironic about people acting like Walter White is this real man who declines every handout and goes out to provide for his family when the show itself is offering that as the criticism. Walt isn't a real man. A real man accepts help. Accepting help as a man is harder than going out and working for everything you have, so it takes real kind of strength to put that ego aside for the sake of your wife and your children, and Walt is responsible for multiple deaths, either directly or indirectly, and even the deaths that were indirectly stem from something terrible that he did himself, such as letting Jane choke to death in Jesse's bed. This leads to Jane's dad going back to work too soon as an air traffic agent and causing two planes to collide, killing many people, including children. Now, this crash wasn't what Walt wanted, and it wasn't what he planned for, but it all stemmed from that one act of not saving Jane when he found her choking to death in Jesse's apartment. Walt tries to justify his actions as saving Jesse, but the show makes it fairly clear that Walt's biggest issue was with Jane and the fact that she was taking Jesse away from him. He wanted to own Jesse and control him. He flat out admits this in the show. The whole ending sequence in the last episode where Walt kills the Nazis is all about Walt letting Jesse go, like Walt was to let go in the first place. Walt even admits in the show to Skyler that the drug trade was never about providing for his family, it was for him. He says it all throughout the series. He's the one who knocks, he's the danger. Even when his family's home is broken into by Tuco's cousins, he still continues to take part in the drugs trade and still puts his family in danger. Criminals breaking into the home where his wife and young children are sleeping isn't even a one-time occasion, and it's not even enough to get Walt to pull out of the drug trade despite having many opportunities to get out. There's one line said by Gus in the show that's completely been memorialized in memes and Twitter posts all over the place, where people have quoted Gus line for line as though what he said makes sense, but therein kind of lies the problem.
And a man provides. And he does it even when he's not appreciated, or respected, or even loved. He simply bears up, and he does it because he's a man.
And this quote is made unironically, with no shred of irony. This speech is Gus manipulating Walt. The whole series sees Walter believing that he is in control, but time and time again he's not. Gus manipulates Walter in the same way Walt manipulates Jesse. This speech serves to outline the critique made against this type of mentality. If Walt would have been taking a handout from Elliot at the start of the series by accepting a job from him, then surely accepting a job from Gus is also a handout. Walt at that point is no longer in charge of his own production, which means he's no longer making his own money, he's no longer in control of that empire. So, if in Walt's mind taking a job from Elliot was a handout, then surely it's the same thing from Gus. It's different in Walt's mind because of the fact that Walt is now doing what he wants to do. Don't get me wrong, Walt is a fantastic character and Bryan Cranston plays him so well. Breaking Bad as a whole is an amazing series that I watch every year, and Giancarlo Esposito as Gus is amazing. I mean, Gus is portrayed and written so well that I was actually sad when he died. But nothing about these characters is something to aspire to. Even at the core level, the show serves as a critique of masculinity being fragile and how those who claim to be alpha are some of the meekest men on the planet. I can't help but laugh whenever someone shares a quote from either of these characters as though it's something to relate to, when the quote itself is a complete takedown of the ideological influences involved in the content of the quote. All the characters in the series are guilty of this fallibility, including Hank, Steve Gomez and Marie, etc. But these characters aren't objectively bad people, they're just flawed people, and there's kind of a big difference between those two things. The Boys is an interesting situation. Who a protagonist is kind of shifts as the series goes on. The primary protagonists are the boys themselves, those being Billy Butcher, Huey, Kimiko, Frenchie, and Mother's Milk. But you've also got Homelander, who also drives the plot forward. And you've also got Starlight, and then in seasons 2 and 3, respectively, you've got Stormfront and Soldier Boy. I hope I don't need to explain why Stormfront was a bad person, but really I do kind of have to explain why Homelander and Soldier Boy aren't good people, as there is a lot of people out there thinking Homelander is some unsung hero of the series, or that Soldier Boy was this real man's man, who is someone to look up to, and while he is one of my favourite characters in the series, Billy Butcher is just as bad, and Season 3 kind of explored how Butcher is willing to go to the same lengths as Homelander is just to defeat him, which shows that Butcher is not operating on wholly selfless levels. Homelander's representation has changed a lot throughout the series, which is the mark of a good character. We've even seen real character change from him. He began as a cynical look at America as a world power, and how it tries to go off this aura of being like the world police, fighting justice and saving the world's freedoms and keeping peace alive, when a lot of times they end up messing it up and making things worse and killing a lot of innocent people. Homelander became like a perfect allegory for America, as while he's out there saving people to the public, there's a lot of cover-ups and dead bodies along the way. Homelander is an insecure man-child who wants the public to love him, and if they don't, he has an extreme internal conflict, convincing himself that there's no problem with him, it's everybody else with the issue. We see this so many times, including his conversation with the inner self in the mirror. As America's domestic policies have changed, so has Homelander as a character. He enters a relationship with Stormfront in Season 2, who, as it turns out, is a 120-year-old actual Nazi and was alive in World War II. Homelander learns this information, and while he seems outwardly repulsed by her Nazi beliefs, and often shrugs off her speeches about saving the white race, he still encourages this relationship, appeasing and protecting her, even mourning her when she's left scarred and defeated by Starlight, Queen Maeve, and Kimiko at the end of the series. Possibly a commentary on how American politics are allowing Nazi ideology to find root there and nurturing it and allowing it to grow, but that's just speculation on my part. But I've seen far more pro-Homelander posts ever since the ending of Season 3, when Homelander just straight up murders someone for protesting him and calling him a fascist. People have justified this because the protester threw something that hit Ryan in the face, but murdering someone because they hit a child with something, it's not really worth murdering someone over. The boys predicted that people would try and justify this by having Homelander cheered, setting up a more outwardly evil Homelander in Season 4, which has me very excited to see, but let's be honest. Homelander's been fantasizing about murdering people who dislike him for years now. Ryan being hit was just an excuse. You can tell after he does it, there's a look of fear on Homelander's face, and then the look of shock when people start cheering him. You can kind of tell this is just another fantasy that went too far. Homelander's going full-blown fascist in the next season and will start killing people more and more in plain sight of the public, and probably for more petty reasons as well. Sure, the protester was wrong for hitting Ryan, but most people would hopefully agree that this response was over the top, and ultimately not everyone agrees with that statement. Some people actually do think Homelander was justified in doing that, And a lot of times it kind of speaks to those people's internal politics themselves, as there are a lot of people, especially in the United States, who have outwardly expressed the desire to murder people who disagree with them politically. And that's exactly what Homelander speaks to. So it's not really that surprising that a lot of people look up to and idolize Homelander. There's not a lot more I could say about Homelander. He just is a bad person. This isn't even attempted to be hidden. It's only really weirdos online with a violence, fantasy, and fascism fetish who disagree. I also love Anthony Starr's portrayal of Homelander, and I love Homelander as a character. I hope the series ends when he does finally die, because The Boys without Homelander just sounds horrifying. He's one of the best elements of the show, but let's not confuse that for idolizing a monster. Next, I want to talk about Soldier Boy, as this is another character I've seen people bring up, but Soldier Boy, much like Walter White, embodies toxic masculinity. You can see this most clearly in the scene where he's watching modern TV with Huey, and he brings up a lot of the same arguments that people have about modern TV and modern society. The most obvious commentary being where he calls Bill Cosby a real man and America's dad, while criticising the man on TV carrying a sling and carrying the shopping. A dad is obviously somebody who symbolises safety and security. The less said about why Bill Cosby doesn't exemplify these things, the better. Whereas the dad on TV that he's criticising is literally providing safety for his baby in that sling and providing for his family, carrying the shopping bags. So that dad on TV is literally doing all the things that we associate with being a dad. But Soldier Boy's criticising that and is praising someone who, again, let's leave out the reasons why, does not exemplify being a good dad.
He's everywhere. No matter where you go, Starlight
Do men really walk around like that?
Yeah, I mean, dads do.
Okay, well, Bill Cosby is America's dad, and I'll tell you one thing, he would be caught dead in that pussy gear.
Lot to unpack there.
Cos. That's a real man. Holy shit, did he make some strong drinks.
This is a brilliant callback for when people complain about modern culture and call for a return to the good old days, despite many aspects of the good old days being objectively worse than they are today. Soldier Boy suffers with PTSD for what he saw in the war and for being betrayed by his own team, and this PTSD manifests in a not so subtle explosion, hurting all those around him. I do feel sorry for Soldier Boy, and I think that Jensen Ackles' portrayal of that wounded hero character is just so good. I can feel the internal struggle he's dealing with, and I think that it's a perfect case study because people herald Soldier Boy as being a real man for the superficial way that he sees manhood and the surface level commentary he has for society, whereas the character itself is a deep and powerful commentary on how society is for men. I think that it's even more important to remember that, as with the rise of people like Andrew Tate, who both bring young people in with what he says when he claims young men are struggling, which is true, but instead of giving them real solutions to cast out a lot of that toxic masculinity that adds to these issues, he peddles more of the same ideas that have been shown time and time again to just make these young men suffer even more. I could have lumped Soldier Boy in with Walter White in this regard, but I think the idea that men have to be strong and never admit weakness, never ask for help, is a large part of the issue that men go through in society, and Soldier Boy is a walking embodiment of this concept. I hope the series keeps Soldier Boy around and does more with him. Maybe get him to admit that he needs help and kind of gets it, because I think that that's all that's left for his character to come full circle. It's one thing to point out a character flaw with a commentary on a large problem with society, but it's another thing entirely to show that solution, and I would like to see Soldier Boy go through that transition in Season 4. I don't really want them to pull a Stormfront with him where he's absent off screen somewhere and then just dies off screen. Let's do this properly with Soldier Boy. Let's bring this full circle. There was no coming back for Stormfront, but I feel like there is some coming back there for Soldier Boy. There is no right or wrong way to appreciate a character, and there are certainly more characters who get the bad but relatable status from people on the internet who solely miss what these characters represent across not just TV, but film and games as well. Not only does idolizing these people say a lot about the people making these claims, but also shows us a society where we're heading and what's deemed acceptable and not. These are just some of the most egregious examples I could find. There is, of course, some nuance, as some characters have done objectively bad things, but I would still consider them good people. Characters such as Five from the Umbrella Academy, the MCU's Iron Man, Willow Rosenberg from Buffy, Vegeta from Dragon Ball, and to a lesser extent, Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty. Whether these characters did bad things because they used to be evil and changed their ways, or they did what they had to do for a positive outcome, the difference between those characters and the ones I discussed in this video, they don't really try and justify their actions. Iron Man's whole MCU arc was trying to make up for the deaths he caused by manufacturing weapons of war. 5 kills people in order to stop an upcoming apocalypse and save the world. He knows murdering these people is wrong. He won't try and justify it, and I think that self-awareness of knowing that you've done wrong and wanting to make good is what separates these characters. Walt knew right from wrong. Walt knew right at the end that he did what he did for himself. He had no guilt for who he hurt and who he killed, and if given the choice, he'd do it all over again. It wasn't in the name of some noble cause. Homelander, while affected by his upbringing in childhood, or lack thereof, is still a psychopath, and there's only so much excuse you can put on someone's upbringing, and I think that that's also an important lesson to understand as well, that someone can have a sympathetic history that makes them who they are, while also recognizing that this person is not someone to look up to. Soldier Boy hurts everyone around him and refuses to change his idea of what a man is, no matter who he hurts, and also his idea of what a man is also hurting himself. And there are more characters just like these. Huey is the exact opposite of Soldier Boy, but probably just as damaging. While Soldier Boy exemplifies how being a man can be dangerous, Huey shows that the exact opposite can be just as dangerous. Huey shows that rejecting the modern ideas of masculinity is also a bad thing. He's also hurt people because he's weak enough to follow Butcher into any fight just for Butcher's approval. If Soldier Boy is the personification of toxic masculinity, Huey represents the toxic side of rejecting most forms of masculinity. However, Huey doesn't get idolized as much as Homelander, Soldier Boy, or Butcher on the internet, so there's less to be said about him. We can also add Joaquin Phoenix's Joker into this category of objectively bad people that the internet seems to look up to. And you know what? I'm going to say it. Tyler Durden from Fight Club as well, and many others. Rick from Rick and Morty, however, is kind of a caveat to being included in that sort of summary earlier. Protests, but his actions hurt people. Everyone. He will literally destroy an entire reality and move on to the next one. His drinking is a symptom of his depression, which stems from, among other things, his knowledge and guilt for everything he's done in the past. However, a character being self-aware of their actions being bad isn't enough to make them relatable. So Rick's kind of that middle ground where he's a good person, but he's not a person to look up to. And I think that's something to keep in mind. I think the conversation surrounding what makes a good character compared to what makes a good character are conflated too easily. I love every single character on this list, and they're some of my favourite characters in the history of TV. However, I know they're objectively bad people. Sometimes the best bad guys are just bad guys. Even if internally they've convinced themselves they're in the right, which all of these characters have, they're still just bad people, and that's okay. I think it's time to separate a good character that you enjoy and is performed well and is written well, and a good character that you look up to, because these two things are not mutually exclusive. So, I don't know what this video has been. It's just sort of been my thoughts on the matter, because there's a lot of posts I've seen on Twitter lately of people quoting Gus or Walter White or Homelander and trying to justify these people's actions, and I think that it's time to take a step back and just sort of add my own thoughts on the matter. It's something I have been thinking about quite a lot. I just wanted to put them down into words and put them on the internet for people to discuss. So that's what I'm doing. So drop a comment in the comment section below. Can you think of any other characters that will fall into this category? Do you disagree with my stances on any of these characters? If so, leave a comment in the comment section below and let me know why. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel as well. I upload almost daily. Sometimes it'll be a live stream archive. Sometimes it'll be a formal video like this. Also head on over to YouTube. Also head on over to twitch.tv/JamesIsTheThunder and go and follow me on there. So you'll be notified whenever I go live on there playing some sort of game. You'll be notified whenever I do. But this has just been something that, while I do mostly talk about games, I also do talk about TV and film as well, whenever I want to. So this has kind of just been something I've been thinking about and wanted to just put into words and put out there for discussion. So get involved in the discussion, drop a comment in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.